Welcome to the Stockman Grass Farmer Podcast, where our mission is to help create a healthy planet and people through profitable grass-based livestock production. Today, we continue our journey with Darren Doherty in part 2 of our series on designing your landscape.
Here in the US, and I'll talk a bit about this this afternoon, is the mapping that's available. So I'll take you through, for some of you who will want to generate a farm map, you have the best resources in the world here in the US. So some of your tax dollars actually go to some really, really valuable things. There are some bureaucrats out there who do. They sit in a room and do mapping work for us, and a good map of a farm is an extremely useful tool. So you've got that all here for just about everywhere in this country, which is amazing. So both through the 3-depth LiDAR Explorer. And also there's another US GS topo view, which has maps in some cases which go back to the 1880s. Amazing which we'll show this afternoon, some of these amazing maps. So you can look at your place through the lens of the original surveyors who came through way back when. It's an amazing archive to have. The other application of the Regrarians platform, and I will make this available to you, we'll get a post out to you or something, is using Google Earth Pro. So we use Google Earth Pro for pretty well all of our design work. I do use higher level CAD design programs, especially Civil 3D and QGIS, but they're a bit more high end. But the majority of you here, if you're looking to do a farm plan, the physical layout planning, Google Earth Pro is the tool to use. Now, what we've developed is a template which is based on the Regrarians platform layers, and it's almost a questionnaire. So it's got a folder. As you go through, you put your, so it's got a checklist. So you go through and that has the whole Regrarians platform checklist. It asks all of the questions that you might do as a stock take of yourself and of the farm as in its state right now. Right? So everything that's there and everything that you want to have there. What your aims and objectives are. What's your succession strategy? All of these things that people need to get down on paper, and we invite people to do that so that and share it with the family. But then you've got the geography, getting all of your maps in order. Where do you put all of your maps? You've got so many different layers of maps, but just as a basic, you've got your boundary, and then you've got all your fencing. Then you've got all of your land types. Hopefully you've got your topography, so all your contour lines and so on. Where's all of your water resources? All of your troughs, all of your water pipes, all of your or ponds, as you call them here. We call them dams. So if I stray a little, you'll understand. All of these things. Where have you got cisterns, etc. So we've got this template here, a folder template that you can then populate. Because if you use Google Earth without any help, it can become a mess very quickly of folders. So we'll get this to you. Keyline, so P.A. Yeomans developed his first farms in the 1940s. So P.A. Yeomans was a mining engineer who did what a lot of people do, and that's buy a farm when they get wealthy. Because just as it is today, owning a farm is a form of for some people is a form of status. And but he wasn't one of those people who just wanted a farm for status. He wanted a farm and he developed it. So he bought these clapped out farms. So his wife said to him, Mrs. Rita Yeomans said, "You can buy a farm as long as we can get home to our house in Sydney by the evening." That was his distance that he could go. So he bought all these farms around the periphery of Sydney, which is now the most expensive city in the world, and a beautiful city at that. And he developed them. So the first person that he started working with was a gentleman by the name of J. MacDonald Holmes, who was the professor of geography at the University of Sydney, very well known. And he wrote a book on soil conservation in New Zealand and Australia. And he'd come over to the United States and studied the soil conservation practices which were born out of the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. and brought those practices back to Australia. And Yeomans was an early adopter of soil conservation practices, a la American, and found that they were very limited. The biggest thing that he found was limited, which is a very telling point, was he said, why stop at mere soil conservation when soil fertility is actually what does the job? He said that in the late 40s. So here's a newbie to agriculture who's not got no backstory with agriculture, no basis to it at all, who buys about 1,000 acres pretty cheap and starts clearing them and developing them. So within 10 years, he released the Australian Keyline Plan as a book, and it developed these properties which had thousands of visitors every year. So he sold, Joel, you probably know better than I about what is a good selling book, but he sold the first book, he sold 50,000 copies in Australia. And Australia at that time only had a population of 5 million people. We have 27 million people now. So it was amazing. And he had literally thousands of people come to the property because what his whole thesis was, I want to overcome the vagaries of the Australian climate. See, the Australian climate is quite peculiar, and it's why Keyline was developed there. It was why permaculture was developed there, which is kind of based on Keyline. It's because our climate is inherently completely unpredictable. So the pattern is no pattern. So here, Europe, a lot of other places in the world, the climate is, I wouldn't say to a clock, but it's pretty regular, and the variability in rainfall and so on. You go to the southwest of the US, it's very different. That's a different part of the world, as it were. That's much more like Australia. California is a bit more like a lot of Australia. So highly variable, and the highs and the lows are quite different, whereas the highs and the lows as you get east of the Mississippi are not quite as radical. So one of the big things that he tried to do was he put ponds into the landscape. And being an being a miner, miners build tailings dams all the time. So he used his expertise and all of his earth moving machinery to build dams, and he put pipes in them so that he could then irrigate. And he used what he called flood flow irrigation. And on he went from there. And before too long, he became the most influential person, and he's still said today that he's probably the most influential person that is in Australian agriculture. So if you go all over the Australian continent, there's dams everywhere, and they're in places that Yeomans suggested they should be. There's water collection channels everywhere. And that's where it really stops. So most people think of Keyline for two reasons in Australia. They think of it for dams, and they think of it for the Yeomans plough, which is a non-inversion ripper. So they're the two sort of associations. They don't, and this is how a lot of this stuff works. People take what they want to take. And I know even from today, I'll introduce to you a whole package of planning, but you'll probably just take away some of that. And that's just human nature. We're not inherently holistic in the way that we think about things. And that's, again, why why we've developed this framework to help people to be that. Other tools that are out there, Harry, look at that, mate. Overyield. So Propagate Ventures, who are, I've been on the board of advisors to. They're based in the northeast of the United States, and they do agroforestry projects, and they've got agroforestry and farm planning software called Overyield, which is a brilliant brand, and it's a package which allows you to go online and start to, especially if you're looking to integrate trees into your landscape for profit, then it's a sort of it's a very interesting package because it's very intuitive. It allows you to design design rows of trees, and then it immediately produces a back end on how much it will cost you to put in, and how much income you'll generate, and how many resources you will need to apply to it, and so on. I hope I've done that some minor justice there, Harry. Yeah, thanks. you can put the money in the jar there, mate. It's all good. All good. And we're doing a agroforestry course up in the Ithaca area in September. I think the 9th, is it? Yeah. So we'll be up there, and that's free for people who qualify, thanks to our friends at the Nature Conservancy and their deep pockets. Very deep. They have to have deep pockets to get me over, right? No, that's not true. I'm very cheap compared to some people. No, I'm only joking. Joel's always done a good job for us. Oh, was I talking about Joel? Welcome to Lucille. I just saw you out the corner of my eye. Thanks for having us here on your beautiful farm, and to Teresa as well. So another thing that when we look at the geography layer, is trying to increase landscape function. So landscape function analysis was developed by an Australian landscape ecologist called David Tongway, who worked for the CSIRO, Commonwealth's Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, or we call it CSIRO. And his whole idea was that we need to, when we're looking at land, if we look at analysis, you can suffer what they say is paralysis by analysis. And landscape function analysis is a very good tool, because all you need is your eyes to look at the soil surface. And it's a really great tool, and if I get a chance with any of you who want to learn about it today or tomorrow, and we have a moment in the breaks or whatever, I'm very happy to show you how to do it. You can go anywhere in the world with these skills and look at any landscape and look at the soil surface and immediately tell whether the three main functions of landscape are occurring, whether it's stable, whether you've got infiltration, and whether you've got water infiltration, or whether you've got nutrient cycling. And you can get all of that just by pure observation. So the first time that that we came filming here for Polyfaces in 2011, I went over into a field just over where the cows are at the moment, and it hadn't been grazed. And I think it was July, so it was pretty well the peak of the season and peak diversity and so on. And I opened it up and I said in the film, it's like a jungle down there, because literally it was. There were worm castings everywhere. There was lots of bugs I was disturbing. You could see that manure was being incorporated. You could see that litter was being incorporated. You could see that there was a lot of plant diversity. It was like 60 or so species in the pasture. It was just incredible. It was a short jungle, like about 2 foot or 3 foot high, but it was a jungle, and it had all of the functions of the forest floor, which then when I went over to our dearly departed Oakley's place, which is now part of the Polyface stable, which is on the adjacent ridge, so one ridge to another ridge, and it had a different kind of management for however long, and the soil was hard. There was no worm castings on it. Like, you could feel just through your feet how hard it sort of reflected to you, and just there was no nutrient cycling. You could see the manure was sitting there desiccated on the soil surface. It wasn't incorporating, and so on. And we were blessed to go there a couple of days ago. Was it yesterday? I'm a bit lost, actually. I think it was the day before. Yeah, and went over there, and you could see just from a couple of years of management. Because when did you take it over? 2019. Yeah, but just a couple of years of management and completely changed. And we see this all of the time. I'm working with a gent in Somaliland remotely, and it's a desert. I mean, it gets 10 inches of rain a year, and after 1 year of grazing change, all of these perennial grasses, all of this landscape function changes occurred just from a simple change of management. Moving animals around, not letting them just have free range access, having a management strategy in place. Water is the next layer, and perhaps one of the more important, and harking back to what we we're just talking about in terms of landscape function. having that 100% ground cover 100% of the time as best we can. It's a big goal. It takes a while, depending on, especially if you're in as Alan Savory would put it, a brittle landscape, a drier landscape. It takes time to build up that ground cover level to that level. It may be that you are up around the 90%, and that's okay. It's better than 20% or what you probably are now. Goals are goals, right? But sometimes they take time. We use gravity as much as possible. Some of you will be on flatter landscapes where, reticulating water will be difficult via gravity, but here at Polyface, I know they were early adopters of that principle. It's what keeps us, as long as the moon's there and we're here, it'll all keep working, right? That's what I say. These days, because of the benefits of chemical engineering and industrial engineering, and we have all of this plastic technology which allows us to have what I call a plug and play landscape. Just like things are like a USB. You can just plug them in and plug them out. It's amazing when it comes to water and fencing infrastructure and so on. But I think the first thing that we need to do is understand the raindrop and its power. And this little diagram here just shows us what that power is. So it's like a little atomic bomb. And when it settles on bare soil, it settles out and it leaves that patina of clay. It's just like when you get a mason jar and you put soil into it and you shake it, and then it settles out. You get the organic material and the turbid clay materials which suspend in the water column. And then you get the organic material which settles first on the solids, and then you get the clay. And it's exactly the same sort of mixing phenomena that's occurring when a raindrop hits bare soil surfaces. Makes it very hard for plants to then sort of lift the lid and get out and about. So it's very important that we do that. And the key considerations of that goal of getting to having 100% ground cover 100% of the time is that it does increase the likelihood that you will increase soil organic carbon. So, sorry, this is in metric, which I'm still curious as to, though the French paid for your revolution, you still haven't paid them back with using metric. You did pay them back, didn't you? Wasn't that, there was something, I don't know. You probably didn't have to because he lost his head. Anyway.
Based on that standard since 1876, but we haven't converted yet.
Yeah, well, there you go. There's the climate of the mind, right? No, but the increase, every percent increase in soil organic carbon equals a 14 litre per square metre increase in water retention, right? So if we look at it, that's 14 quarts. What's that?
It's 20,000 gallons per acre per 1%.
There you go. All right. So it's a lot. So it's worthwhile doing. And, as you will drive around here, you'll immediately, there's a few vistas as you get close to neighbours where you can see the colour of the grass says that there's water in this soil. Yes, there was some rain recently, but I've come here when it's been dry, and I've any number of other clients' properties and projects where the great fence line shot, right, where you see the management on one side and the management on the other. Yeah, enough said. Righto. This was a great outcome. We did this in Columbus, New Mexico. This is an acute example. So this example here, it's where I got a T-shirt there. Which I wear at home. I don't dare to wear it in the United States. It's Pancho Villa, America's First Terrorist T-shirt from Columbus, New Mexico. I definitely wouldn't wear it as I was entering this country. I don't think that would work too well for me. Yeah, that sort of freedom of speech doesn't get you far. But anyway, this place had grown cotton 50 years ago, irrigated cotton, and it was desertified, and they had no production on it. And my client bought it cheap, and that's what it looked like. It was just this vertisol, so these cracking clay soils, but completely bare because it had been salted, and a wrong sort of environment to do flood irrigation if you're not going to also do all of the other regen ag practices. So anyway, we used the Keyline plough on it just to break the soil surface. We could have used the hooves of animals, but we didn't. We used a non-inversion subsoiler, and it got a few inches of rain, and it grew the first plants that had grown on it for 50 or 60 years, just by breaking the soil surface. And then my friend and student Owen Hablitzel, he did all of the assays on it and found, like, he did the befores and afters, and we found that all of these things just changed overnight just from having plants. So much of what we're doing when we're looking at managing our landscapes is managing plants. And that helps for us to actually understand plants a bit better. I don't use the word weed, I use the word plant, or non-target plant is one that I use, because I think weed is a pejorative word, and I think we need to be a bit more respectful of plants. So, anyway, thank you. A botanist over there. All right. So as far as water layouts are concerned, I'm giving you an extremely condensed version of everything here. You'll have to forgive me, but when we're looking at water layouts and farm planning, especially the biggest farm that I've designed is 1 million hectares, which is about 2.5 million acres in the northwest of Australia, cattle station, Aboriginal owned, Fitzroy Station. Still the same sort of deal, right? Even down to the smaller properties like the 30,000 acres and the 50,000 acre places that we have in Queensland. That's the average size farm up there. And they have the same sort of parameters, water and wire parameters. So when we look at, this diagram here is illustrating what are the limits to your design. Well, one of the strongest limits when we're looking at the water layer is actually the fencing wire reel. Because if you're shifting over to doing some form of mob grazing, strip grazing, holistic plan grazing, adapted blah, blah, blah grazing, whatever it is, different beer brand grazing. I went into Greenwood Grocer yesterday and I said, David, you have increased your beer range here. It's quite confusing. I don't know, yeah. But it's like that. So grazing is like that. There's so much confusion. But when you look at an electric fencing wire reel, that's a really common instrument, and it can only carry so much wire. So that then determines how wide your paddocks are. That then determines how many animals you can carry in there. That then determines how wide your hydrants are apart. That then determines how big your pipelines are, how big your troughs are, and so on. So there's all of these things that come together in a plan about how you place them as such. But generally what we are doing is trying to, especially on the size properties that are, say, 2,000, or I'll just convert, 5,000 acres or less, in the main, if you're shifting over to using managed grazing, then the 300 or 400 metre electric fence wire reel will be a really common tool. And so will so will fixed hydrants and potentially movable troughs. Water troughs will be a really common tools, as will be the electric fence grid that you have. So there'll be a metric to that. And if you're on hill country, we tend to have it so that the pipelines are placed higher in the landscape, so that animals always walk up to their water. Because when animals go up to their water, they take their nutrients with them as well. So you've got that movement of nutrients which is going around in that way as well. Yeah, the water layer is a big one. The access layer is too. And one thing about having one thing that we've noticed about the best farms that we've been to have the best access. So this is one of a farm that Joel hasn't been to this farm, but Daniel has. We did a workshop there, I think in 2017, or 2016. This is McIver Farm. So McIver Farm is a 500-acre pastured pig property. And I think I would say I've been to a lot of pastured pig properties. It's where it's just open pasture is the best in the world that I've seen. It had a pretty good designer, I believe. But what I did, it was actually a design that took me about an hour, believe it or not. And this is one of the reasons why it took an hour was because I used what we call the handscape. So foothills landscapes like we have here at Polyface, and a lot of you would enjoy, have the handscape as the layout, right? You've got the ridges, you've got the valleys, you've got the crests, you've got the saddles, right? And then you go down and you've got the creeks, right? That's your landscape. So in most cases, in these foothills landscapes, before you go up into the steep stuff, the landscapes are less than 20% slope. Less than 20 degrees of slope, and that's fine for driving a vehicle up. So one of the first things I did with this particular design was I just drew lines on the ridges. That was it. And in large part, the roads that are on this property are all ridge roads, and there's some roads which are what we call gradient catchment roads. So this is a road design that I developed. I think I was the first to develop it in about 1998, and it sort of happened by accident, as good designs do. And the concept was to use a road as a catchment device, because what we found was that as we were getting better management outcomes on landscapes, we were getting less runoff. And so some clients' dams, particularly on well-structured soils, they weren't filling their dams anymore. And in Australia, the majority of water doesn't come from farm water, doesn't come from groundwater, it comes from surface water storage, from dam storage. So if you've gone and done all of this really good work with grazing management and so on, you increase infiltration, you don't get as much runoff. So we started to look at roads and go, gee, roads collect a lot of water, don't they? And they do. How many people have problems with roads and runoff from roads? So we thought, oh, well, we'll convert these into, so we put a 4% grade on them. And because a road is about a 70 to 90% efficient runoff surface. So Joel's been to this farm a few times, a Taranaki farm, and we built one of these here I think I did this in 2006, I think. And we built that, and every year since, this dam has filled, whereas it was only periodically filling. In a drought, which went down to sort of 10-inch rainfall, no filling at all. So, but every year it's always filled as a result of putting that road. So when we do roads, the majority of the roads that we build in our designs, if it's either right on top of a ridge, and then that ridge road then provides the subdivision, because that subdivision then becomes the laneway, as that road becomes the laneway for the movement of stock. And then you fence either side, and you may well tree either side, and so on, depending on what land surface you've got available. So, or we use these gradient catchment roads, which are a bit more on a contour alignment. They have a fall of anywhere between 1 and 200, so 1 foot every 200 feet of length, up to about 1 in 400, depending on how intense the rainfall is. The other thing that we do when we...
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Stockman Grass Farmer Podcast, where we're dedicated to helping you create a healthier planet and people through profitable grass-based livestock production.